3, 4.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is Jewish Talk, streaming live from NASA Community College on 90.3. Also, you can find us on the iHeart and iTunes app. This program is later podcasted on Spreaker.com. Don't forget, dear friends, you can join us right now in the studio. Hello, I'm waving to everybody. Go to my Facebook page, Rabbi Pearl. And yes, dear friends, I am Rabbi Pearl. And today it's all about mind control. Our subject today is what is mind control and how we can mind control. I first bring you a curious case of the Coca-Cola and the mass hysteria. And I know that Stephen Weitz remembers this very clearly. It was in June of 1999. There was a health scare gripping the world. What happened? Let me give you the background. Several children in a Belgium elementary school began developing severe headaches, nausea, chills, lightheartedness, and shortness of breath. They worsened to the point of requiring these kids had to be taken on an emergency to hospitals. Within a week, their sickness had spread to affect 6 schools, hundreds of individuals throughout Belgium, France, and neighboring countries. Coca-Cola was identified as the culprit, with small amounts of hydrogen sulfide in some bottles being proposed as the mechanism for this illness. Countries throughout Europe initiated mass recalls and began pulling all the products that were made by Coca-Cola from shelves. Now, just to let you know, this recall was the greatest in the history of Coca-Cola. 30 million cans disposed of at the cost of greater than $1 million. And, of course, countless more losses from the negative PR that it brought about. So as the toxicologists and the scientists began to further and discuss this and study it, they realized that there was actually no evidence of any high enough levels of contaminants to be consistent with the systems. So what was this explanation for what caused all these people to fall ill? My friends, it was a simple case of mass psychogenic illness or mass hysteria. Now, how does this happen? Well, mass hysteria typically involves vague abnormal, other kinds of neurological complaints without physical exam findings that occurs sometimes in workplaces or in schools where people come in close contact with each other. And all it takes is one person getting sick. So individuals see their colleague falling ill and they worry about themselves about sick. They may be sick themselves. Now, this is a normal reaction that happens all the time. Aside from a little uneasiness, passes by without causing any further harm. However, the anxiety that causes our brains to misinterpret regular physiological sensations can attribute to this illness. So in the right conditions, this can lead to hyperventilation and all kinds of other symptoms. So once a few people in a close environment start reporting symptoms, Gewalt, it spreads like wildfire. The worse is it gets, the more people likely to convince themselves, "Oh, Gewalt, I have caught the bug." The good news is that just as it spreads quickly, it can be quickly resolved. People typically recover over the course of weeks. Treatment involves separating exposed individuals from each other, and things get back to normal. Well, in the case of the Coca-Cola incident that we all remember, misinterpretation of the symptoms was really exacerbated by the media coverage and the massive recall response. So the initial students who fell ill were at a higher risk, because of the stress that was going on. So what do we learn from all of this about control of minds? What can we take from this story? And our minds are extremely powerful, so powerful that we can convince ourselves that we, God forbid, are deathly ill. But the mind is equally capable of reversing severe physical and emotional pain. So with proper practice and training, we have the ability to eliminate or reduce the consequences of some of these biological disorders, but more so about controlling our mind. So I want to give you some general practical aspects and then go into it more from a Torah perspective. How does Judaism deal with this? One way to take back the control of our mind is what is known as the practice of mindfulness. Let me just pause for a moment and say hello to everybody joining us on Facebook and everybody listening. Mrs. Rothstein, I didn't forget you, and I didn't forget the everybody else, Sybil Triggerbuff. I want to say hello to Stacy Hirsch, Keith Drucker, to Evelyn Herner, to Dr. Kolshevsky. First time he's listening to us today. I can't believe this. And, of course, who else is there? Oh, my goodness. Where's Mr. Wolf? Gene Branston is here. Mr. Wolf must be on vacation. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And if your name comes up and I will pause, I will be happy to say hello and give you a shout-out. So we're talking about mind control today and what we can do to control our minds. And the truth is, there's a lot we can. This is the act of mindfulness, practicing mindfulness. This is the act of bringing attention to the present moment, living in the moment, that can be easily learned through, big words I'm using now, psychotherapy. But let's talk in our world, by making blessings before we eat. Daily blessings. Recent studies have shown that 7 to 8 minutes a day of mindfulness was equally effective as medications in controlling chronic migraine. Further, this mindfulness can reduce the symptoms of ulcers and irritable bowel syndrome, and decreases the risk of anxiety, depression, and dementia. Now, let me tell you something. A frequent opportunity that we all have for practicing mindfulness to be able to help control our mind is right before eating. Take a moment before you eat to appreciate the food. Think about all the efforts made to bring that food to your table. Why are you eating? Where it came from? All the efforts made in preparing it. And most importantly, make a blessing. Make a blessing. Make a bracha. Thank the Almighty God, the source of all creation. Making daily blessings with intent to use the energy from the food to make us well and to go about our work and our mission in life, my friends, will bring a profound result. Another easily achieved mechanism that can rewire our brains to reduce the physical and emotional distress in terms of mind control is, my friends, is keep a daily gratitude journal. Write down the good things to give appreciation. We each have the ability to hone these tools and harness the capacity of our minds to improve our physical and mental health regardless of our circumstances, whoever we are. But let me get into this in a more Torah perspective of how we can learn to control our minds. The first and most important thing is your frame of mind. A person should always be besimcha, an attitude of happiness. When a person lives a life in that perspective, they realize that everything that's happening to him comes from God. Nothing is by accident or comes by chance. This is an important part in how to have mind control. First and foremost is to have a recognition of divine providence in one's mind at all times. The question is, however, how to make the connection between the abstract, this concept, joy, divine providence, and the actual. How can our awareness of these concepts affect our feelings and our minds? Although a person knows that everything comes from God, hey, let's be honest, we often become depressed or broken by tragic things that happen. So what is the core of these feelings? Is it the experience itself that caused the pain and the sorrow? Or is it the person's involvement with the experience? So let me clarify this. When something happens to a person, and the person does not have the intelligence to understand that it's harmful, he's not going to experience pain. When do we experience pain? When we understand. As indeed King Solomon tells us, the more a person knows, the more suffering he experiences. You hear that, my friends? So when a person experiences pain, there are two causes for his feeling: the painful event and his awareness of it. When we mention awareness, what do we mean by awareness? We mean the person's ability to comprehend. But there's another point involved in awareness. A person can be capable of comprehending the pain of a situation, but can choose not to. If a person is tuned into the incident that occurs, he's going to feel the pain. But the person can choose to tune out, not to pay attention to what happened. If he does, and is successful at controlling his mind, guess what? He will not experience any pain at all. Let me share with you a story from the Mozartcher Rebbe, a great Hasidic leader, who composed many magnificent songs. In his old age, he had to undergo an operation. Unfortunately, due to these weakened, his ailment and his body condition, the doctors were afraid to give him anesthesia. They didn't know if he would wake up. But they knew that without the operation, he would not live. So they asked the Rebbe what to do. And listen what he answered. He offered a unique suggestion. He would compose a Hasidic tune, and when the doctors would see that he was deeply engrossed in the melody, they would start the surgery. And that's what happened. He composed a song, and while they were performing the surgery, he was singing the song, and he felt absolutely no pain. Now, today we have that song. That song is available. It has 36 stanzas. Why? Because the operation took quite some time. Now, this is not a story about a Rebbe and a miracle. He was a great Rebbe, a great teacher, and he performed miracles. But this particular event was natural. He was concentrating so deeply on the song that he was not aware of anything else, and therefore he felt no pain at all. Now, obviously, we're not on that level. And that level of concentration is more than a little above us. But there is an aspect that parallels in our own lives. Take, for example, a person comes home from work. Something happened on the train that made him furious. And he enters the door fuming. He's got smoke coming out of his ears. Suddenly the telephone rings. It's a friend from out of town with whom he has not spoken for months. The two friends begin talking and speak for half an hour. When the commuter hangs up, he realizes that for the past half hour, he was not upset. Why? The incident that upset him took place. No doubt about it. The telephone call didn't change that, but it did change the focus of his attention. While he was speaking, he was not thinking what took place. And that is why we see that certain people who endured terrible horrors, for example, people who went through the Holocaust, can nevertheless pull themselves together, rebuild their lives and their families. There are others who have only to discover that they've lost their keys, their car keys. Oy Gewalt! They think they find themselves in the midst of a crisis. So it has to do not so much about what happens, but how much one lets what happens affect you. And this leads to another point, my friends. There are times when we hold on to the memories of an unpleasant event far longer than the event calls for. We continue to think about it day and night, morning and evening, and thinking about it so much reinforces and magnifies the pain involved. There's an alternative. Once we stop thinking about it, the pain will cease. And this is where people make a very big basic mistake. Most people think that they are capable of controlling only their actions and their speech. They know that they can decide whether to do something or refrain from doing it, whether to say something or not to say it. But to think that their thoughts, their mind that's uncontrollable. I can't stop my mind. I'm here to tell you, this is a mistake. It is true, it is harder to control the thoughts. In contrast to speech and deed, thought is constantly going on. There's not a moment of the day when a person is not thinking. But what to think about is under our control. We have the ability to focus one's thoughts as we choose. If a person only realized that he has the ability to stop thinking about a certain incident, he would let go. And once he lets go, he no longer feels so much pain and the sadness. So what do we mean by letting go and turning away from an undesirable thought? Well, I share with you what's written in the Tanya. The Tanya is an important central book in Chabad Hasidus, written by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. And he says that one should push away an undesirable thought with both hands. I want to discuss what it means as opposed to pushing it away with one hand and pushing it away with two hands. Let me first pause and say hello to the Polanskis, Michelle and Larry. Good morning, Larry. Hello, good morning to Ari Sutton, Holly Karen, Renee Critton. Good morning. Thank you to Corey Arnold. Oh, my God. Corey, please, life is that empty. You got to listen to my program. Thanks, Corey, and everybody else joining us. So what does it mean if we have a thought in our minds, and it's an undesirable one, of course, that we can push it away, not with one hand, but with two hands? This is how the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi writes in the Tanya. What is the difference? Well, when an incident takes place, even when it is something that we do not want to think about, it demands our attention. Naturally, our minds focus on it, and thoughts come, right? We start to think about it. So we have three ways of relating to these thoughts that we don't want to have in our mind. One is to accept them, to continue thinking about it, even though it's undesirable. This approach actually encourages these thoughts to come back. Think of the following analogy. A person is being bothered by someone else. Another individual is constantly ringing his doorbell and asking to be allowed into the house, to be given attention. So the owner of the house really does not enjoy this person's company, but he doesn't know what to do. So he has three alternatives. The simplest is that when the person rings the doorbell, he invites him in. The host sees no way out. He sits at the coffee table with a guest. He offers him coffee and cake, and he talks to him for 2 hours. Oh, gewalt. So even though the host does not feel comfortable, the guest does. He got the attention that he was looking for, and he got it. He got a welcome. Surely, he surely was not discouraged from coming again. He got in. On the contrary, after being treated in such a manner, he's going to come back again. That's one possibility. A second possibility for this guy who doesn't want this guy who's hacking him on the door. He doesn't let him in. He stands by the door, screaming at the person, "You want to come in? And get out of the way!" He blocks the entry. In this case, of course, the guest won't enter the house, but he's getting the host's attention. The host is screaming at him, "Get out of here, stop ringing my bell." The host came to the door, he talked to him. Maybe he's not being spoken to nicely. He's been shouted at and screamed, but he got his attention. And so there's a possibility that the guest will return again. Some people like that kind of stuff, no matter how uncomfortable, of a welcome he got. But then, my friends, there's a third alternative. Simply ignore the person at the door entirely. In that case, he may return once, maybe twice, maybe even 3 times. But he will eventually stop because there's nothing encouraging him. He's not being acknowledged at all. And the same motif will work with undesirable thoughts as well. If a person accepts the thought and thinks about it, even though the thought is disturbing, guess what? He's reinforcing this type of thought. The attention he gives this thought pattern encourages these thoughts to keep on coming back from his subconscious to his consciousness, even though it causes him discomfort. One may try to stop the thoughts, to prevent them from coming to the mind. But this often means that the person is fighting himself and repeatedly telling himself not to think about these particular thoughts. Oh, I don't want to do it, I don't want to think about it. But like the host shouting at the guest at the door, he's giving these attention. He's giving these thoughts attention. This is what we mean by pushing away a thought with one hand. With one hand, you are pushing the thought away, but since you are paying attention to it, you bring it closer to yourself with the other hand. In other words, when I'm thinking that I should not be thinking about a particular subject, I'm still paying attention to the thoughts that I do not want to encourage. I'm acknowledging these thoughts, and in doing so, I'm inviting the thoughts to proceed in some other way to come from my subconscious to my consciousness. But here is the alternative. When a thought comes to a person's mind, he can refuse to pay attention to it. He need not make the effort to push it out of his mind. The way to do it is, the Torah tells us, simply ignore it and focus attention to a different subject altogether. The Talmud tells us, Chosh b'roshai, you feel weak in the head, you have a headache, it means your mind, your perspective is getting all wonky. Yasik b'Torah, go study Torah. You completely turn your attention to something else, different subject. And when he ignores the thought, and does not acknowledge the thought at all, guess what? This thought pattern eventually will no longer seek his attention. Most people will ask, how can I think about anything else? The thought keeps coming into my mind. Well, guess what? A person once came to the Maggid of Mezrich with this problem. He says, my mind always straying. How can I control my thoughts? So the Maggid said, go to see my student, Reb Zev. He'll help you. So the person journeys to see this rabbi. He arrives in Jittama, this is where it was at night, and he has difficulty finding the rabbi's house. Finally, he reaches the door, bangs on the door, anxious to get inside. It was cold. There's no answer. He bangs again. Still no answer. Upset, he continues to bang with all of his might. No one responds. He sees the light on in there. Annoyed, he has no alternative, so he spends the night outside. In the morning, the same rabbi welcomes him in warmly. The visitor told this holy man why he had come, that his teacher told him to come to see him. And meanwhile, he treats him nicely. But he's curious. Well, what happened? Here he's treating him so nicely and so warmly. And last night he was given the cold shoulder. He had to sleep in the street. But he kept quiet. He stayed there for several days, sharing talks and learning from him. But this thing bothered him. He had come for the specific intent to learn how to control his thoughts. And the rabbi had given him nothing, didn't even talk about it. Finally, he broached the question. He says, the reason why I came here is to learn how to control my thoughts, and you haven't said a word about it. You haven't taught me anything. But I have, said the rabbi. What? He said. You taught when? The first night you came, you banged and banged on the door of my house, trying to come in. I knew why you were here, but decided not to let you enter. And I kept to that decision no matter how hard you banged. That's the secret of controlling your thoughts. It's easy. It's true. I should say it's not easy. But a person has this alternative. No one can think about two things at the same time. And so when a person forces himself to start thinking about another subject, the undesired thoughts will fade away. True, they can keep on creeping back 10 minutes later. But once again, the person has the alternative of controlling his thoughts and thinking of something else. So the undesired thoughts may return again in 20 minutes. But again, the person can think about something else. Eventually, my friends, if he keeps ignoring these undesirable thoughts long enough, it's going to cease surfacing from the subconscious to the conscious. At first, it'll surface less, and then ultimately it'll stop coming at all. And allow me to give you an analogy. Our muscles are strengthened by exercise. If we do not exercise a muscle, the muscle becomes weaker. If a person is, God forbid, bedridden for several months because of a back problem, he may have trouble walking when he finally is able to get out of bed. His ailment may not have affected the muscles of his feet. But guess what? Because he was lying flat, in inactivity, he wasn't exercising his feet. Now he can't walk. We have many thoughts and experiences in our minds. When we allow them to come up to the conscious level, that's like exercising a muscle. This means that in addition to the fact that we are focusing on these thoughts, we're also encouraging these thoughts to come back again. Just like you practice, you do exercise, you strengthen the muscle, and it stays strong. You keep on thinking about these negative thoughts, it just keeps on coming back. You've given it the ability to come back. When, however, a person does not allow a thought to surface, we go back to the Alter Rebbe's suggestion and teaching, it's like pushing it away with two hands. That means he ignores it entirely. He diminishes the probability of it coming back later. It is possible the thought will reoccur, no question about it. And perhaps many times, but each time it is ignored, it becomes weaker. When by contrast, the person pushes a thought with one hand, what does that mean? He acknowledges the thought and thinks, I don't want to think about it. He is in fact inviting the thought. It's like kind of a form of an exercise. He allows the thought to capture his attention, and this encourages the thought to continue to resurface from his subconscious to his consciousness. Allow me to share with you a story of a man and woman who once came to a rabbi, and the woman was demanding a divorce. What was the problem? The husband would come home drunk, and would say all kinds of unpleasant things to his wife, and in response, she would scream at him. He would then throw something at her, she would throw something back at him, and of course, World War III would break loose almost every night. Despite the difficulties, the rabbi saw that the marriage had potential, even a lot of potential, if both people would only learn to modify their conduct. So he asked the woman to give it one more try. And he promised that if this did not work, he would make sure the divorce went through. What did the rabbi suggest? He told the woman, I have an ancient book of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and it contains a remedy for strife between husband and wife. And he gave the following detailed instructions to her. She was to take a bottle that holds exactly 8 ounces to a mikveh at the midnight on a particular day. She would fill the bottle with water 3 times and pour out the water 3 times. Afterwards, she would fill the bottle again, wrap it in a bag so the others would not see it, and take it home. When your husband comes home, the rabbi said, take a teaspoon of this water, do not spit it out, and do not swallow it until your husband is asleep. After much effort, the woman prepared the bottle and the water. That night, she heard her husband coming home. From the distance, she could hear he was drunk, and he was saying very inappropriate things. Obediently, listening to the rabbi, she took the water, put a teaspoon in her mouth, and held it there. Her husband walks into the house. He screams and he shouts and he insults her. Of course, she was dying to scream at him, but she could not. She had all this water, this mikveh water in her mouth. And so her husband continued to scream and shout for half an hour. Finally, because he got no feedback, he grew tired, fell asleep. After he fell asleep, the woman hurries to the kitchen and spits out the water. She began to scream and shout and release everything that had been building up when he was letting loose, but it didn't bother her husband. He was snoring now. He didn't hear anything. The following day, the same thing happens. He comes home and starts screaming and shouting, but she couldn't answer him because she had the water in her mouth. But this day, there was a change. He screamed and shouted for only 25 minutes. Then he fell asleep. Day after day, this scene repeated itself, but each time, the husband shouted a little less. Soon he shouted for only a minute or 2, and after a while he stopped shouting altogether. When the shouting stopped, they were able to communicate with each other. Once they could talk to each other, they were eventually able to start appreciating each other. Now, was the rabbi suggesting something written in Jewish mysticism? Well, not. Right? The rabbi used a little, license. But what he was trying to say, in essence, was ignore him. Let him reach his moment. And when you see things aren't working out, right, he walked away from it. Why? Because by ignoring it, you discourage it entirely. And I've seen it so many times in my life as well. Get all hot and bothered, you step back, let it go on. After a while, it disappears. The same concept applies, of course, to our thoughts. The key is pushing away the undesirable thought with both hands, turning our minds to another point of focus, and letting the undesired thought flow out of our consciousness without any effort. And this is what Hasidus highlights, the power of our minds, and teaches us that the key to mind control, once you have your key, your control of your mind, that, of course, is the key to your emotions as well. Just like a key with which one can either turn the engine on or off, by focusing or turning off our mental attention, we can control our emotions as well. So, my friends, there's a lot to talk about, and I thank you. Let's see who else has been joining us here. Thank you so much to Dr. Lisa Rosenberg, Renee Critton. Wow, thank you so much. And to Gail Call, thank you for joining us as well. And Jeff Goods, wow, thank you for joining us. The idea is, of course, mind control, that to change events that have happened is not within our power. They're history. But we can change the nature of how we will react to whatever has happened. We have full control over our minds and can decide what we want to think about and what we do not want to think about. And when we employ such control, then we become the master of our emotions. And there's so much to talk about, whether it's the feelings of anger or egotistical stuff. And there's so many resolutions that we can use when we use our minds properly. This is your host, Rabbi Pearl, wishing you a wonderful week. Stay in control of the mind and of the emotions. Sei gesund. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you again.